So, Mikhil, you're a second generation entrepreneur.
Yes, I
That's
am.
and you started your professional journey. You graduated from Carnegie Mellon, and then after that, you joined a company that many at least who were early in the VC ecosystem would have heard of, called Coupon Dunia. Can you tell me a little bit about what was Coupon Dunia, what was your role, and how you got the job?
It was very unique in many ways, right? So I actually, when I was doing my master's in CMU, and I think, I credit CMU quite a lot just because of the, kind of people that I met over there. People were just incredibly inspiring. Like, if I had to just put it in, simple words, all of them wanted to like clearly be something in life. And it's really a testament to the fact, right now, obviously it's been 10 years since I graduated now, almost all my roommates, right? Imagine this, all my roommates, and I've had like roughly around 5 roommates and 5 people that I lived with across my roughly 18 months there. All of them are entrepreneurs and all of them are based out of India, right?
Oh wow!
Right, all of them running their own companies. So clearly there was a vibe in the room or something special going on there. And I think that was really influential to obviously me wanting to have this kind of energy and do these kind of things. I had a very clear plan, right? I want to graduate, I want to come back to India immediately. So I actually came back to India with like zero work experience at all in India, in the US. And when I came back, right, not a lot of people know this, but I actually did like my very first early stage startup. It was a company called Giggle Loop Technologies, right? And I actually started this little app called Me Wants. And if I had to describe Me Wants, basically Me Wants is Dunzo.
Okay.
Essentially, right? Like in 2010, we had this crazy idea of doing something like this. And, it was just me and a couple of other people who did this. And, we did this, we didn't even do this part-time, right? We did this actually part-time while doing my day job. And let's put it this way, that I made every mistake there is to be made in the book in that company, right? Like, I mean, colossally failed, right? Like, and I think that's really important, right? If you fail, you should fail big because it teaches you so much, right?
I also think you should fail fast, right? So
Exactly, right. I mean, and that was actually very, very instrumental to me when I joined Coupon Dunia. And Coupon Dunia was super early days, right? Like, so I joined Coupon Dunia, and I remember looking at Coupon Dunia and actually found them through Angel List back then. And how Coupon Dunia was interesting to me is because I'm a big fan of pizza, and I was actually ordering Domino's, back then, and I was searching for coupons. And Coupon Dunia used to constantly keep ranking, either number one or number two. And I was just like this, and when I saw that job opening, I was like, this is super interesting, right? It's a website which I actually keep using. I ended up meeting Samir, who was their founder, right? And we just hit it off, right? I remember, like, in our conversations, we were talking about pretty much, everything under the sun, right? From the fact that, I supported Manchester United to, playing, FIFA, all of these things on the PlayStation, things like that, right? So I think culturally, we were vibing, right? And that was super critical. And one of the big things which I learned from Samir, obviously I learned a lot, right? And I think a couple of things I highly credit him for is, one is, I think he had this magic power, and like most successful founders have few magical strengths, right? And I think Samir had this magical strength, and I think he yet has it, of building teams of A plus culture, right? Like, I mean, like he has a very simple philosophy in life, right? And which is very powerful. Like, he ends up actually hiring people, I think, that he actually wants to spend a day with, right? And it's a very simple thinking, but it's very powerful. And I saw that firsthand at Coupon Dunia, because the team that he had was A plus in terms of culture. And before that, I'd read so many books which talked about culture. Never really, you don't understand the importance of it, or you don't understand what it means until you experience it. So that was obviously one big thing. And I think the second thing was, by default, which I recommend to a lot of people now, is that, participate in an early stage company, join some founder that you think is sensible, because it's in a way, a lower risk way to kind of make every mistake in the book without it really,
true.
With the blast radius being limited, right? Like, all of the pressure in a way was on Samir. Like, I was there goofing around, trying to do everything under the sun, and, really pushing, to make things happen in a particular way, because I knew in a way I have adult supervision, right? So
Makes sense. Yeah, I like the way you
super
said it.
powerful.
Adult supervision. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember my first mentor, and somebody has to credit for a lot of what I am today. I think he always said is culture is what's happening when you're not looking,
True.
right? When you're looking, obviously there's oversight, but whatever's happening when you're not looking in your organization, that's the culture of the
Yeah.
organization. And it always stuck with me, right? Obviously, and then you obviously keep going back and you sort of do that thermometer check from time to time. What really
Right.
is the culture that is going on there? So,
Right.
so what was the kind of, maybe in a couple of sentences, what was the kind of culture at Coupon Dunia that Sami promoted?
In one simple line, I think, two things which I would say were very, very important to just, give you examples of the culture, right? Was one is actually like, I mean, I'll give you my own example, right? I loved being in Coupon Dunia so much that I got in like, couple of my really close friends to actually join in to Coupon Dunia by literally like, I mean, in many ways, like almost brainwashing them, right? Of getting them in. And both of these guys were actually coming back from the US looking to join like a, early stage company. And, back then, like this is 10 years back, startups were not really a thing like the way they are
Yeah.
right now. And it was like, usually people end up joining like very, very large companies like a TCS or Wipro or something like that, right? And it was very difficult to find a place where you actually liked working in. So when, I had again, like one of my roommates from CMU come back, one of my friends, he was working in Bloomberg there, he came back, I was like completely promoting Coupon Dunia to them, right? And that was to me like the biggest important thing about, having positive culture, that, you actually actively, your A plus members will actually heavily promote you in such a way that they will attract other A plus players. Right? If you have a bad culture going on, what will end up happening is you'll have a negative promoter, net promoter score, right? Like where nobody will tell their friends or, A plus players that they know to join. People probably warn you by saying, okay, like it's pretty shitty here. Like I think you should, probably find some other place, and hopefully if you find that place better, make me join there. Right. I think secondly, one thing which was really useful is the fact that I think everybody was on the same wavelength in terms of, I guess interacting with each other, right? And truly having that sense of ownership. Like we took stuff at Coupon Dunia in many ways, like personally, like because, we promoted it with our friends and family, right? Like
Makes
I
sense.
remember we used to actually like put out like when we used to find like interesting deals, we actually used to get excited. And, actually I remember this, Samir used to actually get irritated that guys, these deals are not for you to actually go on shopping. Right, like, and we used to keep sending it to our family and friends saying, come to our website, see, there's going to be an amazing deal at 6. He's like, dude, you guys are not that, right? Like, focus on our end users. Don't make this into your
Don't become the
personal
end
thing.
user.
Exactly, right? And I remember this because that time, Google used to have their own shopping festival and they used to promote online shopping, etc. And we used to be so excited because, everybody used to be like, I'm going to buy a new iPhone. I'm going to be buying this, that. And actually sending, family members, Coupon Dunia links, this and that, to just order from, this link and, just doing all of that stuff. We were so caught up in many ways of loving the work that we did and genuinely enjoying, what we built. I think that really aided these two things, right? A, loving the product, and B, actually loving working there and attracting other A plus players, to the system. That's what really set us apart from a, culture perspective.
And the role you were the CTO though for Coupon Dunia?
So I was looking at, technology, yes, but to a large extent, in many ways, my primary role there was looking at the product. So, this spanned really across, of course, designing, product teams, engineering teams, just figuring out basically what's the order of priority and what do we really build, right? That was really the big question, that we had to basically solve for, right? And what do customers really want? So we spent a lot of our time over there, as an example, actually focusing on, external customers and actually talking to them and talking to our power users and figuring out, what's really the most important thing for them, right? And you can imagine with a site like Coupon Dunia, there are certain fanatic users. We had a few inside our own office, but there are certain really power users who use these websites because, anything in India to do with saving money, you're going to attract a certain kind of user base, right? And who's extremely vocal and, is using your website like, thoroughly and, on an everyday basis almost, right? Our job really was that, on a 20, the top 20%, top 10% of the users, we kept daily, almost like on a monthly basis, kept interacting with them to try and understand how can we make, the product better for them. And obviously we'll get into how we kind of did that maybe
But
in
it's
the
very
second
interesting.
part.
You said the
Yeah.
top 20% only, right? Why not the remaining
Yeah.
80? And that's a key question. I mean, I know the answer. I'm just asking you that.
Yeah. So I'll tell you like couple of, I think, couple of most important things which most startups should realize, right? Is that, your superpower in many ways is that, you're tiny and nobody cares about you. And I know that sounds super negative, but it's actually one of the most positive things you have going for yourself because, you can do really anything and nobody cares, right?
Yeah.
But that's really powerful because what happens is that, you have to just build something where, you attract the first 100 customers or you attract the first 10 customers, right? And the goal should be that you have a positive net promoter score. And what I mean by that in simple words is that they should go out and be like, this is amazing and tell their friends and family that this is really amazing, right?
True.
So if you are basically doing these kind of things, right, what ends up happening in this situation is that basically that what's working and what's not, right? And the biggest advantage that companies like, early stage companies have versus really large companies like, I don't know, a Facebook or a Google or an Apple, right? They have millions of customers, right? So in that
True.
case, the biggest problem statement is that you can't really talk to all of them, right? And you can't even talk to 20% of them, right? Because 20% of them is a very, very large number. But when you're a startup, actually the 20% of them is a very tiny number. And if you actually spend enough time during, the month, and as every good product manager should, if you spend that time talking to your customers, it's actually a highly scalable number to do. And if you interact with them, right, you will hear pearls of wisdom coming out of their mouth, and it will help you make a better product and design for their life cycle, right? Which is what you should be doing in the first place when you're building a product.
It's sort of like the law of diffusion, right? The law of diffusion of innovation. If you've heard of that, it's a bell curve which says that the first 16% is going to attract the 64% and forget about the last 16. They're never gonna get attracted in the first place. And I think
Oh yeah,
it's along the same lines.
Yeah. See, I mean, every product, right? It's many ways. Most products are polarizing, right? All good products are polarizing. Like certain set of people will be like, this is not a product for me, and certain people will be like, this is the product for me, right? And you want to have that kind of product. You don't
Yeah,
want to
you
have a
want that to
product
be
which,
there. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, you don't want to be like, just you don't want to be blah for everybody, right? Because if
Yeah.
you're blah for everybody, then you really don't end up being like you don't end up attracting power users basically, right? And what happens is this funnel is super powerful because if you end up attracting power users, you know who this product works for. So then at the top of the funnel, when it comes to attracting users and doing marketing, etc., you know the persona you're trying to attract, right?
Makes sense.
And
Yeah. Oh wow.
and
That's a good
having a
one.
very deep, clear understanding of who your power user is super critical because then you do marketing and everything right to that user base because the lifetime value of those customers is going to be insanely powerful. So actually, when people talk about finding the product market fit, right? That's what it is, right? Figuring out who your power customer is. Because if you figure out who your power customer is, no, you have won. Because then you just have to do a
Yeah.
back of the envelope calculation. Okay, how big is this market? If I target this, power user base, how much money can I make roughly, right? And that's how you can just figure out, what your product is all about, at least for the initial couple of years.
I mean, you said something so profound so easily, right? That figured out who your power user is or in this case user profile, right? And all you have to do then, I mean, that's the key I think towards a seed or an early stage round, as that you need to figure that out. And once you've got that, right, all you got to figure out is how many of such people exist in the open population,
Correct.
right? And that's when your TAM is pretty much figured out,
Exactly.
and then it's pretty easy. Okay, for this TAM to be achieved, I need to what's my SAM and so on, right?
Yep.
And I mean, I know you said it very easily because you're doing it for the third or fourth time now, but I'm telling you, how many founders do not get that,
Yeah.
right? Is amazing. I mean, I have seen presentations where they've said the entire country is their total addressable market. And you're like, that's the easiest thing to say, right? and and it like I had one guy in fintech who said, like every person who has an Aadhaar card is my customer. I said, well,
Yeah.
if that's what it is, then he's everybody's customer, right? Why is he just your customer? But it's key, right? It's key. What you just said is so profound. Then obviously you became a co-founder at Coupon Dunya.
Yeah.
Obviously you started later, and then the company got acquired,
Yes.
and you had your first exit. So let's talk about those days. Like what was it like getting acquired? Obviously, this is 2015 or something, right? When you got acquired, or was it 14?
Oh man, I think it's 2013 or 14,
Yeah.
around those years. And yeah, it was super interesting, right? I mean, when we got acquired, I think by Times Internet, obviously, like, very interesting. I think I ended up meeting like really some super amazing people. Obviously, there, I think I first interacted with, Mithane, who's really influential, of course, in the journey of Times Internet. First time there, met bunch of really interesting and obviously highly experienced people, in that space at that point in time. I think, for us also, and this comes in every kind of journey, right? You kind of realize that whenever you're part of something, right, you want to always hit certain milestones before you kind of move on to something next, right? And this is something which is very clear in my mind. Like, and every time I've tried to be part of, something in my mind, there are certain milestones that I like to, kind of accomplish, before which I decide, okay, should I be doing something next, right? And I think that acquisition was one of those things. And obviously, my goal was that, once obviously the acquisition happened, I think this was, one of the, again, early stages, real acquisition, I would say. It was like a, cash deal which ended up happening. One of the real kind of acquisitions which ended up happening. And when that happened, obviously, my goal was, 6 months, I want to stay behind in the company, make sure that, everything's kind of smooth post the acquisition before, of course, start building up again at PharmEasy.
But think about it. You were a hotshot 24-year-old, right? Was part of probably like one of some of the very few exits people had even heard of. Exits were
Yeah,
Oasis, right? Back then,
yeah,
you only heard about them. You didn't actually see them.
yeah.
And in 2014, you got an exit. You got some money in the bank account. It's time to go party, but you did not go party. What happened?
I mean, very honestly, I think, in many ways, like, once you're part of like early stage ventures in general and you have that entrepreneurship bug, right? It's very difficult to do that, right? And, I've experienced this multiple times. Right? Like, I think what ends up happening is when you're part of early stage companies and, you have the right energy in the room and you work with certain kind of people, that wavelength is there and that magic is there, right? It's a drug, right? And I mean this in the most positive way, right? It's something that you just can't live without, right? So, when in fact like positive things happen to you, it's just additional momentum, right?
Hmm.
It's almost like, human beings tend to be like this, when you have a lot of wins and when you have like, wins one after the other, you kind of feel invincible. And this is what actually happens in really good companies as well, right? Once a company is kind of doing really well, and this is same for individuals and teams, once they keep winning, right, you actually feel a bit immortal, right? And that's actually really positive, and I know, don't mean this in a way that you're kind of, you don't take things for granted, but you feel kind of immortal and you try to do much more ambitious things, right?
Makes
And
sense.
that's where the payoff is really, right? And obviously, Coupon Dunia in its own right was, I would say like a version one kind of, startup which kind of targeted, very specific niche of how do you save money on the internet, right? By
True.
doing a bunch of aggregation. In many ways, PharmEasy was, I would say like, version two of a startup, right? Which is, an aggregator, but a full stack aggregator in many ways, where you're taking control of the entire ecosystem and trying to obviously generate unit economics, positive outcomes by,
But Mikhil, that was way
bootstrapping.
later.
Yeah,
That was way later.
yeah, yeah,
Let's talk about how this all started. Let's talk about
yeah,
that, right? And
yeah,
I remember this story because I remember you guys coming to my office, right? And when you
yes,
were just getting started out,
yeah,
and you explained to me how you got your first 40,000 users, right? And
yes.
I'll never forget that story. So why don't you tell the audience what it took? And it's so important for founders to understand. They don't have to make an entire airplane to get
Hmm.
customers, right? Sometimes just the cockpit will do, right? So maybe you could talk about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, this is just crazy, right? So I think, I think we did the mother of all MVPs basically when we launched PharmEasy, right? So I think one of the most powerful things about the PharmEasy experience was that, again, the power of team and culture came in right day zero, right? So I think when we started the company, I was pretty much employee, I think, four or five at Coupon Dunia, and employee number 5, 6, 7, and 8, roughly around that, they joined me day zero at PharmEasy, right? So in many ways, that's like, truly like, having a rocket ship, because, again, the chemistry is there. It's almost like you're working in the same company on a different project in many ways, right? So the speed is just insane. But we took things, to the next level, right? When it came to speed, because when we launched the first app of PharmEasy, right, it was actually like it had two screens, right? And this is the most craziest thing ever. Literally, the first screen basically said that order your medicines and get 20% discount. It had a big ass button for photos, right? And believe it or not, actually the reason why we had a button to take photos, right, of the prescription was because initially when we started speaking to users, everybody just told us that A, we can't read what's written in the prescription, and B, to be honest, we were also very, very lazy, because if we had to actually build like a proper e-commerce website, obviously it's going to require gathering what all medicines exist, creating a database, having pictures, doing all of that stuff, right? And we were like, let's just launch this for now, right? We literally had first page said 20% discount, big ass button to take a photo of your prescription. All the user could take is one photo. On the next page, the user could simply give us their phone number, no name, no address, nothing, right? This was the screens basically, right? And this was, by the way, connected on in the backend to an Excel sheet, right? And this was a Google sheet basically, which was shared, basically with a bunch of, with my other co-founders basically, who used to actually go physically, like whenever we used to get orders, right? He used to call up the customer, take their address, confirm their order, go actually to a physical store, right? Which was the medicine store, pick up the medicines, actually himself go and deliver the medicines, to the customer, right? This is what we did. And in terms of actually, quote unquote, marketing or acquiring customers, one of the big, I think, boons and curses of PharmEasy was the fact that we could not do any online ads, right? We can't do ads saying we're selling drugs. So we literally had to be like, how do we
That'd be a great
build
ad,
this?
but I guess we should not be
Exactly.
using that.
Exactly, right? So, I mean, we literally, what we did. So basically, we were 10 people in the company, right? I think, four of us or five of us were in the engineering team, and the remaining 5 or 6 people we hired as interns from an MBA college in Bombay, right? And it wasn't some, super fancy college, like just some normal college. And I remember like crazy time, but we literally paid them by the way 5,000 rupees a month in terms of internship, because that's what we can afford. And we
Yeah,
just
makes
get
sense.
people, who are motivated. And all we told them is, see, everybody has 200 people in their phone, right? In terms of contacts. Broadcast, and luckily back then, WhatsApp didn't have any restrictions on broadcast. Literally take this message and broadcast it to everybody. So in this way, we made sure roughly 1,500 to 2,000 people know that something like PharmEasy exists, right? And fortunately, like most of the, I mean, everybody was in Bombay, right? So by default, 2,000 people roughly in Bombay knew PharmEasy exists, right? And we started getting organic orders, right? And we started getting orders like by people basically, literally we started getting firstly 1 or 2 orders a day, right? And then we went into the second or third week where we started doing roughly anywhere between 10 to 20 orders a day. And that's when we kind of felt, this is real, right? Because when you get like 1 or 2 orders a day, you're thinking, maybe there's some auntie who's, just being like, okay, fine, I'll do it, right? But when you start getting
Yeah.
that momentum and you start seeing 20, 30 orders, right? You start feeling, hey, like this is real, right? There is something there. And that's when we kind of started digging into the orders and started realizing, because by the way, this is when you're literally selling drugs online, number one. Number
Yeah.
two, everybody that we know, and including some of us internally, are thinking that who's going to be buying medicines online, right? When you have like a fever or something, you just go down and pick up the medicines. Like, is this real, right? And what we came to know, again, looking at the initial set of orders, is that who's ordering? People who have diabetes, high blood pressure. These are the kind of people who are ordering. People who have like who have cough, who have fever, etc. They are not ordering. This made us realize that there's a very, very clear user base that we must focus on and target. And obviously, retrospectively, now it makes total sense that obviously if somebody has a fever, etc., they're just going to take the medicines from down. But what is
True.
cool is you start realizing that if you have like a chronic illness, which is unfortunately going to be there for you for the rest of your life, something like a subscription product which gives you medicines which are much, much more affordable in a recurring manner seamlessly is actually the magic formula, right? And again, all was, it was all with the power of those two screens and the power of WhatsApp marketing, right? That was what is all about.
It's such a simple hack, right? And I think the simplicity was the victory, right? Like you didn't try to, like you said, I didn't try to go build an entire e-commerce website with all this jazz on the back end with, which medicine is what and what does it have and, all the other stuff required. You said, listen, just send me a photograph of what you really want and I'll make it happen, right? And I think that's
Exactly.
simplicity. Yeah.
I mean, and this was, like, this was actually like, I mean, when we spoke to customers, right? And, and again, a lot of us know this, but intuitively back then, right? Every website and every e-commerce, you think checkout, right? You think,
Yeah.
items, products, add to checkout, and that's how you think. But, that's where we kind of started thinking that, what are really people doing, right? And when we started talking to customers, we started realizing that nobody even knows the name of the medicines that they have, right? Because the names of the medicines are so complicated. Like, I don't know, like, Ranbaxy, blah, 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 blah. It's so complicated. Who remembers that, right? If you ask me to place an order and put a gun to my head, I won't be remembering the name of the medicine. But one thing I'll always have is just take a photo and basically just end up ordering, right? And
Yep.
and that's what it's all about.
And then obviously PharmEasy then sort of took off, right? To per se. Like, I mean, next thing you know, you were at what, 40,000 users? And what was that like? What was that moment like?
Yeah, it was surreal, right? I mean, I would say like in many ways, in PharmEasy, like, I mean, you know, we are loved, we are loved by our users in many ways in the sense that, like, I mean, when we came, when we, came into the picture, and I remember those early days, right? We actually ended up partnering with many, many sort of old age homes, and, a lot of the, people who are kind of giving away medicines from a charity perspective, they ended up partnering with us in many ways at that point in time, because for them, this was a double victory, right? A, obviously it was super convenient, but B was the fact that it actually saved money, and with the limited money they have, of course, they can end up ordering more medicines. Uh, it was a lot of positive vibe, obviously, that we got, initially, and that just gives you such a great feedback loop in many ways, right? And I remember the kind of emails we used to get from customers, right, which is so fantastic to get, right? Because honestly, when you're doing an early stage venture, everybody goes through so many problems, right? It's literally like, like many times people say, right? It's like flying a plane while building the plane at the same point in time
Yeah,
and just
true.
trying to prevent a crash, right? And all you need at that point in time is just positive momentum, helping you do that thing as fast as possible. And we had that amazing customer base, right? And one of the things again we focused on there is, focused on basically figuring out again who our power customer is. And one of the
Hmm.
things that we mandated over there, right, was again in our product team, we kind of were maniacal, like, and we took that a lot from, to be honest, Coupon Dunya, right, where here, in fact, like the profile of the user was so obvious, right? It was very, very clear that the user base is somebody who has a chronic disease, right? Now we need to figure out what's the life cycle, right? And basically we had three questions that we had to figure out when we were talking to users, right? Question number one is, what are they doing, in terms of their life cycle before they're
Hmm.
ordering on PharmEasy, right? And usually the answer used to be, okay, I used to be maybe ordering offline, or I get the prescription from the doctor. The second thing is, when you get the prescription, right, what do you exactly do next, right? So
Yep.
the answer used to be, I used to, end up ordering from, offline. I used to give it to my son to order, or when you go into the PharmEasy app, right, what's exactly the workflow you use, right? Like, how is it that you're ordering, right? Are you using repeat orders, or are you, taking a photograph every single time? And the third and most important thing we wanted to know is, what do you end up doing once you get the medicines, right? Like, how do you
Hmm.
end up remembering when to take the medicines, right? Like, as an example, once you get the medicines, you have to take them multiple times a day, multiple times a week,
True.
whatever. How do you remember all of that? How do you do a refill? Like, what's your entire life cycle management?
And I
Um,
believe you did all of this in person.
yes. So one of the most important things, which,
That's you've
which
done so many things. I have to remind you that this is a very important point. So yeah, yeah.
no, I mean, see, I mean, honestly, as a founder, I think this is so critical, right? I mean, again, when you have limited users, you have to go and meet them, right? Because if you meet them, I mean, let's put it this way, right? This is the only point in time you can actually do that, right? Once the company becomes like, I don't know, $1 billion company, unfortunately, the statistical significance of meeting customers one by one may not be as great, right? But
Makes
when there
sense.
are
Yeah.
limited set of customers, that's where you're going to get insights which are so powerful to take you to that next stage. And when we went and did that, right, like we basically, established a very simple, matrix inside the company, which was, in PharmEasy as a product, either we are going to, dive deeper, which is solve, the middle part of that use case, which is what are you exactly doing while you're using the PharmEasy app, or whenever we decide that, we've actually gone deep enough, that's when we go to wide, right? Which is like, what do we do? What does that person do before or after using PharmEasy, right? So as an example, the before stuff was usually, doctor prescriptions, etc., which of course
Got
today
it.
you see PharmEasy is solved. And obviously the stuff which comes after is, the reminders. Again, you will see all of this stuff already built out at PharmEasy. But the number one thing that we kind of focused on before we kind of, went wider in the product was solving for what do you exactly do at the point in time, when you're on the PharmEasy app, right? Which was
Makes
going
sense.
deeper into the use case.
So let me ask you the $1 billion question. How were you getting medicines at 20% off?
This is where really, the magic really comes in, right? Like, I think great companies, right? They come in with many kind of, I would say, unfair advantages, right? And one of the big reasons actually we were able to make, and PharmEasy is super powerful, right? And is a special company, right? Is because we had fantastic vertical integration, right from day zero, right? So we actually partnered with one of the largest, pharma distribution companies, back then, to make sure right from day zero, right, we have great vertical integration kind of set in. So in fact, like
Hmm.
at PharmEasy, like, a lot of people just see, the consumer facing app, etc. Actually the reality is the consumer facing app is just 10 to 15% of the work from a technology standpoint that we did. The real work actually that we did at PharmEasy, right, was actually all in the back end, which was obviously one super critical thing that we solved for, was that how can we digitize the entire workflow for, ordering medicines from a shop or a pharmacist to the distributor, right? And usually one of the biggest problems, by the way, back then in the distribution space was that when people are placing orders, right, which are the offline pharmacies, the medicine used to get delivered to them, right, in 3 to 5 days, right, which was like crazy amounts, right? And they used to have
Yep.
hardly any inventory, as you can imagine. But with PharmEasy, we actually made that into 3 hours, right? And this is because we actually had tech integration where we knew live what inventory is there at the retail stores, right? And that was actually integrated live into the ordering system of the distributor. And
Oh,
in
wow.
order to, yeah, in order to do all of this, by the way, and this is a legacy industry, right? We had to partner with people who were actually thinking about the future and wanting to be in the future by doing all of this tech integration. Because remember back then, we are an early stage startup, who's probably like 5% or, lesser than that of their revenue. You really have to have that vision in your mind that, A, you believe these guys are going to be something special, and B, you think that this is the future. And a lot of the work that we did, obviously behind the scenes, was figuring out who are the right partnerships to have from a distribution perspective, from a retail perspective, who are open to adopting these technologies. Because only through that, right, could we bring about that, amazing vertical, integration, where we had, specific, distributors that we partnered with, specific retailers that we partnered with, so
Makes
that we were
sense.
able to place bulk orders to get those economies of scale going.
As you grew, right? And I think for a very long time, I think PharmEasy was the only game in town, right? It was the only discount provider of medicines, and that too, taking orders online and delivering them offline. But
So,
then suddenly, you saw competition coming in, and how
uh-huh.
was that conversation internally about, oh wow, NetMeds is there, and
So very honestly, I mean, and I don't want to sound like, arrogant or something like that, but honestly, we just kept focus on ourselves, right? Because the reality was we had our hands full with our customers, right? To be honest, and we knew the problems that we need to solve for them. And if we solved it for them, and we saw this, right, with customer feedback, and we kind of did our own, mystery shopping at few of these competitor sites, and we knew they weren't offering amazing user experiences, right? They were offering user experiences where if you place an order, you end up getting your medicines in 7 days. Half the medicines don't show up. A lot of those issues, because the real challenge here is, getting the vertical integration in place, having the supply chain sorted, dealing with the regulatory issues, so many issues, right? So, it's one of there's a reason why obviously it's taken so many years for somebody like a Flipkart or an Amazon now, or even now, obviously the big guy, Geo, right, to kind of really look at this and be like, let's really solve this. because it had a lot of problems, right? It's not something that you can just start like, like food delivery as an example, right? Like where, regulations are not really a challenge. So
Hmm.
we really knew that the moat in this space is extremely big, right? And it's actually not about the capital, and it's not really about, uh, who really has the most money, or if you get competition, what ends up happening. For us, in fact, like we were very happy that there was competition because it was creating awareness that, hey, you can order medicines online. That was really the push that we wanted. That we just want to create awareness, right? Like, and this was something that we used to keep telling inside internally. The goal right now is to create the market, right? In many ways,
Makes sense.
PharmEasy was not a company, as an example, which had an existing market, right? Like the existing market was completely offline. Like online medicines, was not prominent and is not prominent across the world. This was like creating a whole different market, getting people used to the user experience. So we were actually very happy for a lot of people to come in and be like, you know what, create awareness. And we knew that we'll take care of our customers the best, right? So we'll end up having the highest retention rates. And if you end up having highest retention rates and the other guys in the room are constantly spending money on marketing and having poor retention, they're basically just doing marketing for you in a way, right? Because
Yeah,
they'll
makes
order
sense.
once from
Wow.
that company
Yes, we
and
should we
have a
should put a
shitty
banner for
experience.
that one. No, very very nicely said, man. I mean, and Mikhil, obviously, Farmeasy was the poster boy, right? And in the middle of all of this, you decided to leave and you went over to Hotstar. What was that? What was it that triggered that decision? Can we talk about that for a couple of sentences?
Yeah, absolutely, right. I mean, I think this was one of the early lessons of entrepreneurship, right? And this is what ends up happening. And obviously, a lot of that I'm taking into, my current venture at Apollo, right? Is that when you raise a ton of capital, essentially, right? Obviously, one of the things which ends up happening is crazy amount of dilution, right? Which ends up happening to every founder. And that's where capital is super expensive, right? And
Yeah.
and you don't realize this always when you're doing your maybe most people realize this in early on in their kind of careers. I guess at that point in time, that was the big learning lesson for me, that once you raise a ton of capital, you end up really diluting yourself. And that's when you really start thinking that, is this the best thing I can be spending my time on? Are there more things in life I want to kind of accomplish? Are there more experiences I want to have, right? And obviously Hotstar was something which was on my head at that point in time. I was talking to Varun, who obviously now he was recently the CEO at Hotstar for some point in time, and he was back then the executive vice president at Hotstar, who was looking after product, tech, everything really. And he had just moved down from Silicon Valley and started setting up his team, in India. And I remember back then, Hotstar was like 6-7 million monthly active users, which, as crazy as it sounds today, like seemed like amazing scale to me back then, right? I was like, wow, like, this is real scale. Because we all forget, like actually early stage companies are, all startups, right? Like they're not massively, crazy scale from a tech perspective, right? So that's a very different challenge. So I was actually very, very excited for something like that. Seeing, oh my God, I'm gonna have 6-7 million monthly active users is a whole different challenge. And
Wow.
obviously, Hotstar was a mad animal, right? Like it was a ride like no other. And I yet say this, like, in terms of like raw tech and raw, scaling a company and raw just, dealing with the challenges which come with, from a technology perspective, there is not a single company, I think, in India who can, lay a hand on Hotstar, right? Like, I mean, it has 350 million monthly active users. When there are cricket matches, there are like 10-20 million concurrent users with broken world records left, right, and center.
That being said, so you left Hotstar and then you joined something. I mean, I guess the smallest company that was ever in your career, right? You joined basically a 6 crore market cap NBFC, pretty blind dormant, run by your mother, by the way.
Yeah,
Admit it
yeah.
so. And you said, you know what, I'm gonna go do this. And I remember that conversation with you. I think this was one of our lunches. I think at the Taj or something, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go build Apollo, and I was like, what's in Apollo? Like, actually, I didn't even know that you guys had a listed company at that time. I was like, what's Apollo going to do? And you said, no,
Yeah.
I'm going to do something interesting. Just watch, right? And I think it was called Musk Melon or something
Yeah.
early on. And I
Yeah.
was like, what's a musk melon? And I remember this sitting over there at Taj and having this conversation. But why did you move from, let's say, now you've built, and it seems like every single time you kept building a better and greater opportunity, and then you were like, you know what, let me go do something else, right? And then this was another one, right? What was the trigger?
So the trigger was again another milestone, right? Like obviously Star as an entity, around December 2017, I think this is like, Disney comes in, right? And they're like, we love what you guys are doing, and we want to acquire Star. And obviously the crown jewel was Hotstar, right? And just this growth was staggering, right? And that's where obviously my entrepreneurial itch was starting to come in, where I felt like I've taken this boat to a nice kind of ending, right, where Disney comes in, right, literally the Mickey Mouse guy comes in and says that come and join the kingdom, right? And that's when I'm like, okay, now I know, like my beautiful company and the beautiful product that we have is in safe hands, but I want to be an entrepreneur. I think that's where I kept saying this, right? Like, it's very, very difficult to let go of this, right? No matter where you are, if you've been an entrepreneur, you'll really have that itch that, I want to do my own thing. And that's where, this itch started coming up. And, Apollo Finvest, of course, is an amalgamation of all of my different experiences in many ways, right? I think, when I was at PharmEasy, as an example, I noticed, one of the biggest problems we had was, our pharmacies, right? Like, used to have a lot of trouble getting working capital loans from traditional lenders, even though they were like highly profitable companies, right? They used to make like 2-3 lakh rupees of profit per month, which, by the way, insane from a local mom and pop pharmacy,
Yeah.
because usually before us they used to make like 25-30,000 rupees a month, right? So 10x profits, right? Like, so they should be getting access to 10-20 lakh rupees of working capital. But sorry, like, online revenue is not really counted by traditional lenders, so you won't have access to working capital. Then at Hotstar, right, which was again super interesting, we obviously earned a large chunk of our money through ads, right? And I had my eye on, obviously the demographic analysis of India, and I realized, something which was very, very crazy, where 90% of India didn't have access to formal credit, right? And to me, like, and this is coming from a guy who has zero background in finance, right? And obviously, to a lot of people, they'll be like, "That's obvious, you doofus. That was the fact." But to me, I was like, "This seems crazy." Like, I mean, how is like 90% of India in informal credit, or there's like traditional lenders won't support them? And then the wheels started kind of going in my head of how do you end up solving this problem, right? And what I actually started doing is, then before I really formally decided to what to do in Apollo, I did a couple of things, right? One is actually I start meeting every fintech founder, basically, which accepts my meeting in one line, right? And I use every connection I know, and I'm spamming people on LinkedIn, and I'm like, can we talk, right? I want to understand, what's going on. That's the number one thing. Second is, like you mentioned, right? We had an NBFC lying in the backyard, and I'm like, what? Let's maybe with about $500,000 or so, let's start lending, right? And this is coming from a guy who knows nothing about lending, right? And obviously, I was but super fortunate that I had an infrastructure which was Apollo Finvest, and obviously, one of the biggest advantages I had was the fact that my wife, right, Diksha, was actually, she had like almost like half a decade's experience in banking, right? And she basically was like, from a risk perspective, basically, again, I would say, quote unquote, adult supervision, right? Making sure, like, I think of basically the broad picture, but she makes sure from an execution perspective, it's world class, right? So the first thing I really, and we as a team wanted to do was figure out, how do you actually do digital lending, right? And the only way to do this is actually start doing it yourself. And we started doing that, and in parallel we started talking to a bunch of fintechs, and what came out was like some very interesting insights. And the largest insight basically which came out was, what, the market is monstrous. It's a desert out there. There's crazy demand for credit, but what's missing is the fact that there is no NBFC which is actually technology driven, or there is no base layer technology infrastructure provider who we can just plug and play and start going, right? It's like every time you have to talk to a traditional lender, it takes 6 months for us to convince them. Then after even convincing them, they'll probably decide who they want us to give out a loan to, and the whole user experience is horrible because they have ancient technology. And it
Yeah.
just felt like the entire, fintech ecosystem was crying out for basically an equivalent of AWS, right? And just the way AWS is for like apps and websites, and how game changing it is that if you have an idea, like, an app or a website, you can launch in like 2 or 3 hours as long as you have a laptop and, a credit card. Can we make something similar, to unleash innovation and credit in this country, right? And that's
Sort of like an
really to
NBFC as a service.
exactly right. Like, and that was really the seed of the idea, right? Can we create basically, almost like the app store, which basically makes going, and our vision was super simple. In 40, our mission is basically like we want to decrease the barriers of entry for any company in India to start being able to offer digital loans to their ecosystem in 48 hours, right? It was super ambitious, right?
Wow.
And people were usually doing this in 6 months, 8 months, etc. And we were like, no, we're going to make this completely digital, make everything into Lego blocks. And the benchmark for us is 48 hours, because we were comparing ourselves to AWS. We were not comparing ourselves to the traditional guys, right? And over the last almost now 3 years, right? I think this has been the ride of a lifetime in many ways for me, because I've got to do, obviously take, obviously a family company super close to my heart, take it ahead. But I've got to do something which I've realized like I love doing, which is work with so many entrepreneurs, working closely with them to launch, products, most innovative products that they can think of, you know, going from, 0 to 1 so many different times with so many different fintechs. We've worked with almost 50 different fintechs today, right, to help them start off their digital lending operations and scale, right? And this has been like a really, really amazing journey in many ways.
So, Mikhil, the rules for rapid fire very, very simple. I obviously had you talking now for an hour, 30 minutes. So, if you want to take a sip of water, please go ahead. But
Yeah.
the rules are very, very simple. I'm going to ask you a question. The first thing that comes to your mind
Yeah.
is the first thing they need to answer, and then we'll see whether if it's interesting, we'll go deeper, and if it's something you want to skip because okay, you can just go next person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So first, are you ready? Can we go?
Yeah. Let's go.
Cool. Let's do first question. It's a Peter Thiel question. One thing that you know to be true, but very few people agree with you on it.
Oh, I mean, don't chase PR.
One piece of advice that you received on entrepreneurship or being a founder for that matter that you still follow.
Take care of your team.
Take care of your team. That's a good one. Let's put it. Let's ask you to place these in order of importance to you, right? As per your thought, four things, right? And the first is team, founders, customers, investors. Now just place them in order of importance. Most important on top, and least important last.
Definitely, founders number one, team, customers, investors.
Founders are the most important to a startup. I'm in the sensing.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. You were saying.
yeah. So the reason for this essentially is because if you get the founders and team right, they will eventually find the right customer. And investors are the least important in many ways, because without all of these three things, money is getting wasted, right? So you might as well not have them involved in something which is going to waste their money.
So scaling before profitability or profitability before scaling? And I'm talking about unit economics. So to be clear.
I mean, here, so it depends. If you're creating a category creating company like an Uber or a PharmEasy, probably scale before unit economics. You need to basically see whether there's a market for this, and that does require cash burn. Or in a company like Apollo, as an example, where this market exists, and there is no real good reason to hand out money for free or do something negative gross economics. Then obviously here profit matters before scaling.
So I guess if a company does start with negative unit economics, they should have a clear pathway of how they're going to switch that and make it into positive.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the only time I think a negative, unit economics is okay in a company is when, they are when they are category creating companies, right? When there are companies which this market doesn't exist, they're trying to create something out of nothing. That's where it's okay to have a, negative unit economics with obviously a clear path of profitability and getting there, but most likely if you end up discovering the right market, you can always price it right, hopefully. That's kind of my thesis on that.
One thing you would like to change about the Indian startup ecosystem?
I would say, I would love to see more, second and third generation entrepreneurs being involved in like VC style investing, or actually any kind of investing, to be honest. I feel like that market is extremely shallow. And I know like this whole ecosystem is very young, probably like, 15, 20 years old, right? But I think over the next 10 years, I really hope that, that kind of, divide is kind of met. I would love to see, Anderson Horowitz, kind of setups being there in India where, they even have partners as an example who are running their own, companies in parallel. That's very,
And
very
still doing that.
powerful, I think.
It's a great
Yeah.
blog, great blogs to
Yeah.
read actually.
Yeah.
Just quoted. I just wrote on a blog that I think Immerman had recently written. It was a very very interesting, very insightful. Obviously
Yeah.
coming from their level. If you could pick the brain of one person for 24 hours, ask them anything you want, right? Basically, hang out with them as friends. Who would it be?
Wow, that's an opportunity of a lifetime. Unfortunately, my answer would have been Steve Jobs, but he's not there with us. So I think the only crazy guy I would pick right now is Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
Just yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, the conversations you could have with him could be so crazily wild, right? And if I was not able to get access with him, actually, I would end up going with Sir Alex Ferguson, who's the ex-Manchester United, boss, is the best manager in the world. Has mad experience, right? He's 70 plus years of age. He kept a team up, 30 years of relentless, being at the top of the game, right? Just to know, that's a true, true definition of long-term success, sustainable success, right? I think he would be like a fantastic coach to have, for every kind of, entrepreneur who's thinking of building, sustainable, long-term, successful enterprises.
Cool. I've got my second last question to you. Your biggest advice to founders about fundraising?
Uh, Delay it as much as possible. And second one is raise funds when you don't need them.
Wow, raise funds when you don't need them. I think that's a very key one, guys. And I think besides your startup, what is one thing, or besides Apollo in this manner, what is one thing you're obsessed with right now?
Oh, I mean, I'm just a very obsessive person when it comes to technology. And I'm actually obsessed with Apple, right? Very annoyingly so for a lot of the friends, families around me. But actually, I think if there was ever an award given by Apple in terms of the number of devices sold by any single individual customer as a salesman, right? I think I would be the best salesman that Apple would ever have. But yeah, I'm like super obsessed with technology in general, but like very, very obsessive about Apple, and just love so many things about that company, right? Like very, very inspirational. And I can talk about that company probably at least 50, 60%, of the amount I can talk about Apollo.
Wow, wow, we'll have to do another show for that one. So, so with that, Mikhil, we come to the end of our rapid fire round. You did extremely well, by the way. I don't have hampers for you, but I will buy some stock of Apollo tomorrow. uh, that being said, I think we'll take a couple of questions before we sign off. I think we've got a question from Vijay Raghavan Govindaraju. He said, "You seem to have built massive scale at Coupon Dunia, PharmEasy, Hotstar, etc. Where do you see Apollo Finvest 5 years from now?"
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to continue on our mission, right? And our mission basically is that we want to reduce the barriers of entry for every single company in the country today to start offering digital loans to their customers, right? And we want to enable it in 48 hours, right? And the roadmap essentially there is super simple. I feel like many companies, like I said in the past, right, are going to be on a trajectory of starting to offer their own financial services, to their either their own employee base like an Ola or an Uber, or they're going to end up offering it to their merchants like a Swiggy, Zomato, or a I don't know, like a Razorpay as an example, right? I would our goal essentially is to make Apollo Finvest the operating system on top of which they are building. We are on a very, very good path. I feel extremely, privileged to be in this position with the team that I have, who's, put some magical things together over the first 3 years. But again, I think we're just scratching the surface. Ideally, I see the company like something very similar to AWS, where we'll have a very, very, very long tail. Ideally, I would love for us to be a platform which truly democratizes, credit to the point where I'm not just targeting digital companies and large funded companies, right? I would love it if I could, truly enable, credit entrepreneurship where, maybe there's some guy who's sitting in some remote part of India who sets up his own, in a way, credit offering or credit shop over there in that town, right? Where he knows the 100, 200 people in his town the best, right? And he could use the Apollo Finvest infra to start, offering digital loans there. That would be wow, right? Like, I mean, that gives me goosebumps if I am able to enable that. And that's the dream, right? And that's where we're going towards. Right now, we're just scratching the surface. Honestly, I'm doing the easy stuff. And I'm going to an audience who knows me, I know them, selling to companies which basically, are digital companies. This is like my comfort zone, right? Like, really, where we get out of our comfort zone is towards that long tail. Uh, if you're able to do that, that'll be wild.
Mikhil, thank you so much for an amazing conversation tonight. Really appreciate you taking out, almost 2 hours on a Thursday night and really giving us an insight to what a CTO like or a person like you would really is going after excellence. And I can only see amazing things ahead for Apollo.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Sorry for having such a long show. Bye.
See you guys.